We'll let everybody get seated. Good evening and welcome. Thank you. I love that. Thank you so much. Welcome to the Frazier History Museum and The Journey, part of our Bridging the Divide programs. We want to thank the Gaines Foundation right off the start for their ongoing support. And we hope that you're going to remember all nonprofits in the Kentuckiana community come Thursday with Give for Good. Because as you know, your support will help us bring programs like this to you. So thank you in advance for whatever nonprofit you want to remember on Thursday. And tonight I couldn't be more pleased to be part of what I consider, take a look at this, an all-star lineup. We have artists, writers, educators, musicians, all here to tell the incredible story of the Underground Railroad in their own unique way. It's why I think so many of you are here tonight. They know how to draw a crowd. You see them on the screen behind me. They're here in the audience with us, and you're going to meet them throughout the evening. I want to say to them personally on this front row, I can't thank them enough for their talent and for making us see, feel, and be moved by our history. Kentuckiana, as you know, played a central role in the Underground Railroad, serving as a major corridor for enslaved men, women, and children fleeing bondage. Part of that story is represented in our new permanent exhibit, The Commonwealth, Divided We Fall. Some of our presenters tonight have ties to that. From the boat, you can see right here, in that exhibit, we have the original columns and the clock face from the Town Clock Church in New Albany. Is everybody familiar with that? If you're not, you're going to learn more about it tonight. It really was a symbol and a beacon on the journey for the enslaved of Kentucky to reach freedom in Indiana. They certainly weren't home free when they got to Indiana, but it was a free state. I want to show you this picture as well. This is of the Town Clock Church back in the day. It was completed in 1852. You're going to be seeing different images of the Town Clock Church tonight, and the next one has to be one of my favorites. I don't know if you all have seen it. It is by a photographer named Duke Marsh. Have you all seen this one yet? I saw it on Facebook thanks to Jerry Finn, who's with the group Friends of Town Clock Church. And this one, when I saw it on Facebook, I have to say, stopped me in my tracks. That I started reading some of the comments on this, and you couldn't help but become emotional. One comment was from Sadiqa Reynolds, who's the president and CEO of the Urban League. She wrote, "My God, I imagine the ancestors seeing, planning, and escaping by the light of the same moon." Woo, amazing. And I agree, the hope of a new day. So tonight we begin the journey with a writer and a storyteller who I have come to know and certainly admire. He's going to give us an overview of the Underground Railroad. He is known for his top-rated history podcast, The Humanity Archive. Anyone here familiar with that? Oh yes, I knew you would be. Very good. And next year he's going to have a book out by the same name. He is at his best telling stories that were left out of the history books. And with that, we welcome Jermaine Fowler.
So I first want to say thank you to Rachel Platt for inviting me here today, and also want to say thank you to the Frazier History Museum for the kind invitation, and I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out this evening. And I think that I want to begin with the words of Frederick Douglass. He was probably the most influential abolitionist of the 19th century, and he said something that's always stuck with me. He said, "I prayed for freedom for 20 years, but I found no answer until I prayed with my legs." And if you remember no other words I say today, I want you to remember that that was the embodiment of the Underground Railroad. Most people conjure up images of trapdoors and flickering lanterns and imaginary trains and moonlit pathways through the woods when they think of the Underground Railroad. But I want you to remember that it was only through self-determination and organization, in spite of the abomination of American chattel slavery, that an estimated 100,000 black people escaped to a fragile freedom. 100,000 examples of agency, 100,000 examples of self-preservation, 100,000 people unwilling to deal with the unwarranted and undeserved misery, escaping the human trafficking that brought over 12.5 million, some say even 30 million, if you include the deaths, forts of the Americas on the Middle Passage. So I just wanted to start off on a note of seriousness because it was a life and death seriousness that they were dealing with. So framing the Underground Railroad for me means to extract the narratives of those who have come before me. And I know that there is a lot of talk right now of critical race theory, but the grand American narrative of history hasn't really dealt with Confederate race theory that for over 100 years framed slavery as benign. They said the enslaved were well-fed and they were happy, and if they tried to escape, they had a mental disease called drapetomania, because, you know, who would try to escape this wonderful and peculiar institution? But the hypocrisy of such lives when human beings were categorized as livestock under a dehumanizing system of white supremacy. And even today, this history is sanitized, it's deodorized. There's still textbooks that call enslaved black migrants instead of humans trafficked. And so it is with the Underground Railroad. I think a lot of people often want to talk about what people were running to and not what they were running from. And often, what were they running to? There was no absolute freedom in the North. It's not like you just crossed the Ohio River and you were just in a promised land of freedom. There was a pandemic of kidnapping in the North. I think a lot of people tend to forget about the Fugitive Slave Acts. There were people that came to northern cities with manacles and chains, and they policed and they controlled and they contained black people in black neighborhoods. They busted into black churches, kicking in doors unannounced, and then you see the foundations of the mendacity within the criminal justice system and the arbitrary rule of power that executed the no-knock warrant leading to the death of Louisville's own Breonna Taylor. So I see the pastness in the present. We're talking about a connected and protracted struggle for black freedom. We are talking about the unflinching call for the recognition of black humanity. We are talking about a humanity that has often been interrogated, questioned, and outright denied. And I don't want to forget about the interracial coalition and the long history of all people fighting against the scourge of slavery. But I think that black people have often been marginalized in their own liberation story. So the heart of the Underground Railroad for me then is Harriet Tubman, who said slavery was like hell, but when she crossed that line, she looked at her hands to see if she was the same person. And she said there was such a glory over everything that the sun came through the trees and over the fields, and she felt like she was in heaven. We were talking about people holding on to hope in the face of catastrophe. So I want you to, when you leave here, look up the names of Elizabeth Freeman, look up Sarah Parker Redmond, look up Ellen and William Craft. Look up William Steele, the father of the Underground Railroad, helped nearly 1,000 self-liberators that were called fugitives in their own time. I call them self-liberators because they broke human laws to abide by the laws of morality and survival. What about Louisville? Of course, we love to celebrate self-liberators like Lucy and Thornton Blackburn making a daring escape. We like to celebrate the legacy of the Town Clock Church, and we should do that. That's very important, but I just wanted to, again, just tell you about the night side and the dark side of the Underground Road, because I think that's important, that's so often left out. Historians say that Louisville's central business district grew thick with slave traders and slave pens throughout the antebellum period, and I'm talking about the history of mothers and fathers and other people sold for $200 and $300 and $400, and this history still haunts Market and Main Streets. The slave trade exploded in Louisville as black people were groomed to feed the South's appetite for unpaid labor on cotton plantations. A man named Henry Bibb came through Louisville and talked about it in his autobiography, and he escaped through here, and he was caught, and he had a log chained to his legs to keep him from escaping again. And he described Louisville as like a person entering a wilderness among wolves and vipers blindfolded. So it is estimated that 77,000 enslaved people were sold out of Louisville to the Deep South. And I know some of you might have expected a little more cleaned up and tidy version of the Underground Railroad today, but I just really wanted to be real about this history. And for me, it's a somber occasion of reflection, honoring the 77,000 faceless, the nameless, the unknown human beings, and the few that we do know. So tonight, for me, I just wanted to frame this as an act of remembrance, an act of recovery, an act of reflection. And we know that most of human history is full of domination and exploitation and hatred and contempt, but I think that if we rummage through the wreckage of history, then we can also find the greatest possibilities for human freedom and democracy, and we can also find that on the Underground Railroad. I just want to leave you with the words of Maya Angelou, who said, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again."
Thank you so much, Jermaine. And you know I told you I'm going to be your marketing person. Can you stand up and tell people where they can pre-order your book? Or come back up to the microphone? No, I mean, these are the stories, right?
Yeah, I'm a terrible marketer. I like to tell stories mostly, but I do have a book coming out in February 2023 called The Humanity Archive, where I inject stories like this, my own personal journey through history. So hope you all buy it, make it a bestseller, maybe. Yeah.
Is there a
Help me
website?
out. Yeah, thehumanityarchive.com/books. And yeah, so go there, purchase it, pre-order. Appreciate you all.
Thank you very much, Jermaine. All right, next we want to bring up two members of the Frazier Education Team to the podium. Our entire team has been working for months now on a project entitled The Journey, Unsung Stories of the Underground Railroad. It is an audio tour. You probably saw a leaflet on your chair when you came in. You're going to talk more about that in just a second. It's free to the public of significant locations and landmarks along both sides of the Ohio with connections to the Underground Railroad. You're going to meet a very important couple on this journey. Jermaine mentioned them. We're talking about the Blackburns, and their story has shaped so much of the work of the Frazier History Museum on what it has been doing with the Underground Railroad. I'd like to welcome Heather Gottlieb and Brian West from our Frazier Education Team, and I will turn over the clicker to you all. Mick, we have a problem. Stand by, because this is important as part of yours. We'll wait till he gets that back before I get out of the way. We're multitaskers here.
It's powering off. Yeah. So normally we have Kentucky show and it powers off after 5, so it's kind of like acting like it's a normal day. It's not a normal day.
So will it power up is the big question.
But it's going to take a few minutes.
Yeah.
It's on its own.
You know what? Okay, I'll tell you what let's do instead. Because your all's PowerPoint is important, so we're going to do the musical part of the program for right now. So Heather and Brian, we're going to have you take a seat. Stand by. Okay? And James Racine is going, wait, what? What are you doing to me? All right, so we're going to bring the stories of the Underground Railroad in different ways, and their PowerPoint is important to what they're doing. So as we continue to power back up, we want to bring the stories in many forms, including music. Spirituals came to life to help the enslaved survive and cope with the atrocities inflicted upon them. Spirituals also at times were used to communicate and share information with one another. Go Down Moses was said to be one of the spirituals that Harriet Tubman used to announce that she would be leaving soon for the North. Here to talk about the importance of music during this time, and more than just talk about it, really make us feel it. Welcome James Racine, also known as Maestro J, and his musical partner, Omega Latham. Thank you for punting for us.
Everybody say peace. Peace. Everybody say love. Love. Everybody say black excellence. Black excellence. And I'm so honored to be here, and I'm so happy that we are including music because there's so much beautiful music from black excellence, and we have to play it and we have to talk about it because a lot of that beautiful music, folks didn't even get credit for. And so one of the songs that I'm going to play, we actually don't even know who the original composer is because they didn't even have that right to get credit for the beautiful music that they wrote. And following up from what Rachel just said with the music that Harriet even used, everybody say creativity. And that's what we had to do to survive, because she would sing this song, wade in the water, to warn the fellow slaves to jump in the water so their scent wouldn't get picked up by the dogs and everyone hunting them. So let's just share this moment and honor Black excellence. Thank you so much. Give it up for Mr. Omega Ché Latham on the keyboard. Thank you so much, Rick.
While we're waiting for the PowerPoint to come back, let me just ask you a couple questions.
Yeah?
Tell us a little bit about what you just played there.
The wade in the water?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything about it?
Were you here before I played? Because I did talk a little bit. That's the teacher in me. Right? No, but in all seriousness, you know, when you think about this, the combination of just survival and just the need to survive and what we have to do and pulls the creativity but in the equity work that I do, it's very important that we continue to talk about these things and we have these conversations, right? Because how do we expect our young folks to be empathetic if they don't really know the truth? So in my 17th year in education, this is the work that I do every day, every morning, and hope you will join me to continue this work. But yeah, so thanks for having me.
Thank you all for being ready to go for us. We appreciate it. Now I'm going to bring up Brian and Heather with our education team. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but I think we're good. All right.
Thank you, Rachel. Before we get going, I just want to issue a few more thanks. I want to thank our education team for creating the Journey audio tour. It was really a 5-year labor of love. We workshopped this down to the nanometer. We went to different locations all around Kentuckiana to create this audio tour to get a sense of where things were going. I also want to thank a couple of individuals. I want to thank the late Dr. James Blaine Hudson, who was really the godfather of African American history here in Louisville. Without his work, this probably isn't possible. And last but not least, I want to also thank Dr. Carolyn Smarts Frost, who without her book, I've Got a Home in Glory Land, we probably wouldn't have been able to create the journey. So this was one inspiration. Another inspiration was this historical marker located at the corner of 4th and Main here in downtown Louisville. And it talks about two individuals who are really the primary players, the primary historical figures in the journey. So it starts with Lucy and Thornton escaped to Canada.
So what is the journey? It is an audio tour that is free and available to the public. It features many local voices, and it consists of 6 stops. 4 are here in downtown Louisville, including the historic marker Brian just told you about, and that is the opening stop in the journey. And 2 are in southern Indiana. So it ends at the Unknown Project Reflection Area, which is one of 2 we are thankful that are provided because it's very important to this experience. You don't have to travel for the journey. You can actually experience it virtually at home or in a classroom. There are actually teachers here tonight who just spent the evening learning about how to use the inquiry design model to teach the journey as a lesson in the classroom. So thank you, teachers, for being here tonight. So we came across the book, I've Got a Home in Glory Land, in 2017. And in the past few years, we've felt compelled to share it in any way we could. This has opened up opportunities for collaboration with a lot of people like Dr. Ricky Jones at the University of Louisville, Jermaine Fowler, the Unknown Project, and with regards to the Unknown Project. Although Thornton and Lucy's story is known because of the extensive legal records and the documentation, there's so many stories that are lost to history. So thank you to the Unknown Project for bringing those stories to light and just helping us understand the scope and the impact of those stories. So Dr. Carolyn Smarts Frost came across this story in 1985 when she was completing a public archaeological excavation of a historic school in downtown Toronto. So it wasn't just the school that she uncovered. She was working with local children, and so you can see them here in this picture in 1985. Soon after they uncovered the grounds of the school, they actually found the home that belonged to Thornton and Lucy Blackburn, and Toronto, Canada was their eventual home.
Now, how they ended up in Toronto is pretty interesting because the story really begins here in Louisville. So on July 3rd, 1831, Thornton and Lucy, in broad daylight, make an escape from Louisville across the Ohio River to Indiana. Now, the reason for that was because Lucy was in danger of being sold. Her owner, or the person, her enslaver, I should say, was found to be financially insolvent. So when he passed away, one of the ways that the enslavers would try to recoup their losses was to sell what they considered their property. And so Lucy was in danger of being sold. And so Thornton and Lucy got together. They wanted to stay together. They were basically husband and wife, and they had a plan. So on July 3rd, they boarded a ferry, horse-powered ferry across the Ohio River to Jeffersonville, Indiana, and they used 2 sets of papers. So the first set of papers was a holiday pass. Now here in Louisville, shout to slavery was somewhat different from what we normally think of as shout to slavery. It was less working on the fields or doing manual labor, and more being domestics or working in stores while you were enslaved. And so Thornton and Lucy had that advantage of not being literally in chains. But that being said, there were certain strictures and rules that the enslaved here, even here in Louisville, had to follow by. And one of those was having documentation. And so they had a holiday pass that they were able to get forged, attesting to the fact that they were able to go across the Ohio River to Indiana. They next used some papers expressing that they were free to board a steamer in Jeffersonville, Indiana, that went to Cincinnati. And that steamer reached Cincinnati on July 4th, 1831. Now, Thornton and Lucy were well aware that they were still in danger, even though Ohio was a free state. There were slave catchers all over the border along Kentucky and Ohio. So as soon as they reached Cincinnati, they went to a stagecoach office in Cincinnati and boarded a stagecoach for Sandusky, Ohio. From there, they took another stagecoach, which eventually took them to Detroit, Michigan. So by the fall of 1831, Thornton and Lucy gotten settled in Michigan territory in the town of Detroit. And Thornton had gotten a job as a stonemason. And one day, Thornton bumped into his old boss at a department store he worked in here in Louisville. His name was Thomas Rogers. And so the person who considered Thornton property would hire out Thornton's time to the person at the store called Wirtz and Reinert's, which was located, at 4th and Main, right where the historical marker is located now. And so the conversation went well. No mention of Thornton's captivity or lack thereof was brought up. And Thornton was a little bit worried, but then once Rogers left, nothing really happened for about a year and a half. That wasn't until June 14th, 1833. And so there was a knock at Thornton and Lucy's door. They opened the door and they saw the sheriff of Detroit along with this young man named Talbot, Oldham. He was a nephew of the brother-in-law of Thornton's enslaver. And the brother-in-law's name was Judge John Pope Oldham, a member of a very prominent Kentucky family. And so the judge had sent his nephew up to Detroit to reclaim Thornton. They also used documentation in Kentucky's fugitive slave laws to also attest that Lucy should be taken back to Kentucky as well. And so during that weekend, they were tried before a judge, and the judge, based upon the laws in Kentucky, said that Thornton and Lucy had to go back to Kentucky. And so they were detained in the local jail in Detroit. They were scheduled to head back on a steamer called the Ohio to Kentucky that following Monday. But a curious thing happened. So word spread throughout the African American community in Detroit, which was pretty sizable even during this time, that Thornton and Lucy were in captivity. And so many blacks and a few sympathetic whites got together and decided to come to the jail. And so some of Lucy's sisters helped spring her out. I won't ruin how that happened. You had to listen to the journey yourself, so you won't be disappointed, I promise. So they sprung her out. And then eventually the people came and they eventually sprung Thornton out as well. They took Thornton on a stagecoach and rode him down to the Detroit River. And then they were able to ferry him across the Detroit River to Windsor, Ontario, Canada, where he was reunited with Lucy. Now, their troubles didn't end there. This is in Canada in 1833. And so Talbot Oldham came along with a lawyer and demanded that the Canadian courts extradite Thornton and Lucy back to the United States. But what happened was that since Canada had a law which stipulated that unless someone's committed a capital offense, like murder, no one could be extradited away from Canada. And since Thornton and Lucy's offense was not really punishable in Canada, basically stealing yourself, Thornton and Lucy were considered free. And so, and that's how they remained for the remainder of their lives. And they stayed in Canada from that time onward.
So if you remember the excavation that I was talking about, that's the eventual homestead that Thornton and Lucy built. And they opened their home eventually to refugees who were also fleeing enslavement in Toronto. And their legacy still stands there because Thornton ended up founding the first taxi company in Canada. And so today in Toronto, all of the taxis still bear the colors of his original hackney cab, the city of red and yellow. So here at the Frazier History Museum, we seek to ignite the human spirit with thoughtfully crafted stories about who we are and our connection to the future. So the stories is the key word. This story has been told in many forms by the Education Department. We've done a series of Underground Railroad-related performances. We participated in a mini symposium with Dr. Carolyn Smarts-Frost, the Carnegie Center for Art and History, Dr. Cheryl LaRoche of Johns Hopkins University, the Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, and the John Parker House in Ripley, Ohio. We created a series of travel kits that go out to schools, and we've done multiple programs with Dr. Frost, both virtual and in person, in Kentucky and on the Indiana side of the river. We've taught this through the Veritas program at Bellarmine 3 times, and we have Thornton and Lucy's story in the Commonwealth Divided We Fall exhibit, which is on the 2nd floor here at the Frazier, and it does feature hints of new research that's to come about further details of Lucy's life. We were fortunate to win a Kentucky History Award in June of 2022, but what is most important is the story of Thornton and Lucy. It's local to our community. It features places you can physically be in and places you've physically been in before. It helps us to connect to the past and how that is relevant today, especially through the classroom. So again, thank you, teachers. Everyone we have shared this story with has been touched by it. We're grateful for the partners that have helped the journey to come to life. So that's Dr. Ricky Jones, Ché Smith, Pastor Marshall of the Town Clock Church, Jermaine Fowler, Jerry Finn, the Carnegie Center for Art and History, and Grid Principal Design Firm for the Journey logo. So if you're interested in experiencing the journey for yourself, you can access it via the sheet of paper that was on your chair today, or via the logo or the URL that is here on the slide behind me. So we thank you for your time and hope that you get to experience the journey soon.
This is another picture by Duke Marsh. I kind of want to put those up throughout the evening. I think they're just absolutely stunning. We talked about education, we've had a writer, and now we want to bring up an artist, a visual artist, as well as an arts advocate. She has selected a painting to talk about tonight that we want to share with you right here, A Ride for Liberty, The Fugitive Slaves. Please welcome Dr. Jabani Bennett.
song was a traditional, spiritual, and you would hear traditional spirituals during this very complex time in history. And as an educator, I sometimes sing to create deeper connections. I have 3 questions for you for silent reflection. And this is using the visual thinking strategy approach. So first question, what's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? What else can you find? Now, why, keep those thoughts in and reflect. Why do you think that this image is noteworthy? This is an oil painting on paperboard, painted in 1862. What value is attached to this image? It was painted, I'll give you some context. It was painted by Eastman Johnson. He was a white man, a renowned American painter. He was known as the Rembrandt, American Rembrandt of his day. And, an important fact, he was the co-founder of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the largest art museum of the Americas. He was the co-founder, the painter, right here. Now, his family, his father, Philip Johnson, was a highly regarded politician in Washington, D.C., and he supported his son's art career. So Mr. Johnson had access to high-profile public figures, painting them all the time. So that's Eastman Johnson, so you get the context of the painter. Now, why is this image noteworthy? Just giving you more. This work is a part of a type of painting called genre paintings. And it's when you paint a scene and you may not know the individual specifically, and it was very popular during this time. And what made this piece unique in art history is it was during slavery times and during the Civil War. You didn't have image where former slaves were demonstrating themselves as agents of their own freedom. So that is one of the major reasons why this piece stands out, and also it was preserved. Now, if I could ask Mr. Johnson a question, I have a few things. Thank you. I have a few questions for Mr. Johnson, and it would go like this. Mr. Johnson, you made 3 versions. You made 3 versions of this piece. One piece is in the Brooklyn Museum, okay? One is in the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and one is lost. Mr. Johnson, why did you not show this piece in your lifetime? Okay, Mr. Johnson, you had major success from a piece that you made a couple years earlier than this piece. It was titled Negro Life at the South. It was also titled Old Kentucky Home. Even though it was a setting in Washington, D.C., urban slaves, enslaved Africans together. It was a very upbeat picture. It was a major success for you, Mr. Johnson. Let me see if it's far-fetched. Did the success from that piece impact or influence your decision not to show this piece or the 3 versions? I'm just curious. It might be a stretch. Mr. Johnson, I have a question, another question. How much influence did the major cultural works of the day, Uncle Tom's Cabin, that was written in 1852, and Old Kentucky Home around the same time, the song Old Kentucky Home, how much influence did that have on your work? Mr. Johnson, you spent a lot of time with the Ojibwe Native Americans. You studied the group of people, you painted the group of people. How did that shift your lens in your work, Mr. Johnson? Oh, last question, Mr. Johnson. You have the opportunity to spend time in Germany and experiment with innovative ways of painting with the Dusseldorf School of Painting. How did that experience with your colleagues impact this piece? What did any of that experience come when you created these three pieces, these three versions? So I'm just curious, with that experience that you had, which was one of a kind for many artists at that time. Now, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Those were a lot of questions, I'm sure. Now, if I could ask two questions from two Black art collectors of the time, two free men, William H. Dorsey, based in Philadelphia, and Edward M. Thomas. How are you doing? I have two questions. Okay, from your work as art collectors and a keen eye on the art world of the day, did you know of lesser-known Black, Asian American, and indigenous artists who captured or tried to capture acts of resistance or real stories witnessed within the Underground Railroad? So as Black collectors of your day, did you see that, especially in the Underground Railroad using the genre painting approach? Mr. Thomas, and I know, Mr. Thomas, you were based in D.C., so you knew a lot of the public figures that Mr. Johnson knew. And Mr. Dorsey, your archives were fantastic. I have a question for you, too. Did Mr. Johnson capture the complex moment realistically from your vantage point, from your expertise? Did he do it? The last question. And I have this last question for my late stepfather, Dr. J. Blaine Hudson. If you don't know him, he was the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and the author of Fugitive Slaves and the Underground Railroad in the Kentucky Borderland. So, and I lovingly called him Estadio. Estadio. Dr. Hudson. I know you've been gone physically since 2012. I have a question for you. You know I always talk to you, so I have a question for you. Why was it so important to have this image on the cover of your book? Why was it so important to have this image on the cover of your book about the Underground Railroad, which you wrote? The Underground Railroad was one of the most powerful and sustained multiracial human rights movement in world history. Why this image? Why?
Don't leave us hanging. Because I'm just, why? And Dr. Hudson, got to interview him many times. Lovely, lovely, lovely. So thank you for sharing that with us as well. We told you this was going to be a rich night, right? Go ahead and go on to our next picture here. So we have more heavy hitters to come. Our next guest really needs no introduction, but I'm going to give her one. Artist Hannah Drake, along with Josh Miller in this picture. They are the co-founders of IDEASxLab. That's an artist-run nonprofit. They've created the Unknown Project, which you've heard a lot about tonight. The Frazier is a partnering organization, and we are so proud, really, and humbled to be part of it. The first art installation of the Unknown Project is on the banks of Freedom, not far from the Frazier at 9th and 10th Streets on Louisville Riverwalk. You heard our education team mention it as one of the stops on the journey. I'm going to let Hannah tell you more about the spaces of the Unknown Project and how they help tell this story with the hope of healing. So please welcome Hannah Drake.
Thank you, Rachel, and I will just do a little storytelling about the Unknown Project. So y'all know I'm a poet, so I'm going to read a poem. Y'all know me. I wrote this poem, believe it or not, in 2016, but this will all fit into the story. It's called Finding Me. If I close my eyes, I can see them. And if I quiet myself, I can hear them. Their voices carry on the wind like the tune from chimes floating on the distant breeze. Who are you? And where did you come from? When you dreamed, what did you dream of? What is your story? What was your name before they gave you that name? Was the name passed down through our family? Am I your descendant? I stare at my face and I wonder if I look like you. I try to put faces to shadows. Can I find pieces of your memory in cotton fields and red mud? Scattered bones in unmarked graves that attempt to erase you from history? But you were here. You were always here. You existed, unknown no longer. I found your name. I found you. And in finding you, I found me. So I wrote that in 2016 after I'd come back from Dakar. And I'd stood in the door of no return. My daughter had stood in the door of no return. And I wanted to see the other side of slavery in America. As I lived in Kentucky, I thought, I need to go deeper south, right? So I'm like, I don't know where south, but I know it's deeper south. Because Kentucky was just not on my mind for some reason. And as life would have it, working with Josh and Theo at the time, they said, Hannah, we're going to send you to Mississippi. And I said, no, I ain't going to Mississippi. And no, I ain't. But indeed, I did go to Mississippi, and I went to Natchez, Mississippi, and I was working with a group of the girls there called Girls and Pearls. And in the day, I'd work with them, and then at night, I would start visiting plantation homes. And I started visiting a lot of the homes, and eventually, they all started to look alike. And I knew when I talked to my mom and told her I was going to Mississippi, and we start talking about enslavement, picking cotton, and my mom, She'll be 72 next month. She said, Hannah, you know, when I was a little girl, I used to pick cotton. And I said, Mom, what are you talking about? She had never told me this story before. And she said, when I was 9, I used to pick cotton. And I said, how long did you do this? And she said, until I was 12 years old. And she said, my grandmother would come pick me and my brothers and sisters up, and we'd go to the cotton field. And I said, where did you do this? And she said, in Tennessee. And I said, Mom, what is the name of your grandmother? Because she has never talked about her grandmother. And she said, I don't remember. I'm going to tell you something, Rachel. This is going to blow your mind. Everybody's mind is going to be blown in here. Watch this. And she said, she said, I don't remember her name. And I said, well, can you think real hard? And she said, I don't know. We just used to call her Mamie. And I said, okay. And I knew that a part of my mom had been lost in these cotton fields. So then when I went to Mississippi, they still have working plantations, let you go out there and pick cotton and everything, you know. And I did it for like 30 seconds, and I knew I probably this wasn't it for me. And so when I came back to Kentucky, I wanted to go see, and I can't remember what year this was, but I wanted to go see the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. But lo and behold, I run into Rachel before I'm going, and she said, Hannah, have you ever heard of Thornton and Lucy Blackburn? And I'm like, no, is that like Beyonce and Jay-Z? Like, who are they? And I'm like, I've never heard of this couple before. And she said they were an enslaved couple that escaped from Kentucky. And we're going to do something at the Frazier, and we want your help with that. And I said, okay, check this out. I'm going to go to Alabama because, you know me, I just love going south, right? And I'm like, I'm going to Alabama. And then when I get back, we'll talk about Thornton and Lucy Blackburn. So I went to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice when it opened up. And in order for your state to be listed in this museum, your state had to lynch over 100 people. Kentucky lynched 169 people that they know of. And they etched the names of the people that were lynched on the pillars that hang. And so I went to Kentucky's. I wanted to see all of Kentucky's. 8 of the names on the pillars are listed as unknown. And immediately it just came to me, this is going to be the project that we do in Kentucky. And I wanted to find out the names of the unknown. And working with Rachel and Roots 101, African American Museum, we wanted to do something down by the river, of course, because the Ohio River was integral in the slave trade. You heard earlier 77,000. I heard as high as 80,000 people were sold down the river. That phrase literally originated in Kentucky. And so we wanted it on the river so that people could reflect and tell stories. And what was most important to me were the names. And immediately when people heard about this project, it got picked up in the New York Times. People started sending us names, and it said, in fact, my family did enslave people, and these are their names. So the names that are etched on back of the benches are names that people in Kentucky actually submitted to us. These weren't names that we went to look for. People finally said, here's a will, we have ledgers, we have names in Bibles, that we are just hiding. So it's not that people are unknown, they are just hidden. And people don't want to tell this story in 2022 because they're ashamed. And I tell people all the time, it's not that you need to be ashamed because it's 2022 and no one thinks that you enslaved anyone. The shame comes from knowing the truth and still hiding it. So if you have the names, give us the names, because in doing that, you free the people that were enslaved. And you also free yourself because you're carrying a weight that you no longer need to carry. And so now through this project, we have gotten over 800 names, and all of those names have come just from regular people sending them into us. But this is the part that's going to blow your mind, Rachel. I'm gonna tell you. This lady sent me a Facebook message, and I hadn't seen it because, you know, I'm like, okay, whatever. But it went to that hidden folder, and I don't know what made me go to this hidden folder, but I did. And it was a woman named Dana, and she lives in Louisville, Kentucky. And she said, Hannah, I read this story about you, and I might cry because this is all new. Like, this just happened like 2 months ago, so whatever, I might cry. And so and she said, I read the story about you in the New York Times. She had been trying to get in contact with me, I believe, since last year. And I just, or maybe this year, because you know COVID, I don't remember what year it is really. But and so finally I messaged her back, and I talked to her, and she said, I have found your family. I've traced all of your ancestors for you, Hannah. And so I met with her at a Starbucks, and she gives me all of this paperwork. And she said, Jor, you can tell your mom that her grandmother's name was Eliza Cochran, and she was born into slavery. And she knew where her grave was, and I was able to call my mom and say, Mom, your grandmother's name is Eliza. And then she said, but Hannah, I want you to know something. I trace this back even further for you, and your great-great-great-grandmother's name was Hannah. And she, and she was enslaved in South Carolina, and they moved her. And I said, where did they move her to? And she said they moved her to Mississippi, Alcorn, where you have visited the university. And she said she got married and had children, and those children migrated to Kentucky. And I'll never forget when I went to Senegal, a guy there told me the blood is always crying out. And I believe with this project, my ancestors were always saying, come find me. You exist because I existed. And you are here, Hannah, and you are a fighter, and you are named after women that are fighters and that survived. And because I'm here today, I know that my ancestors made it. And so all of this, and finding all of these names and writing that poem, I believe in my heart it was so that I could always find myself. So that's the Unknown Project. And please, that's the power of the Unknown Project. It gives people back themselves. Everybody should have the right to know where they came from. So if you have names, if you have locations, if you have stories, don't let shame keep them hidden. Free them and free yourself. Thank you.
Well, you're right. Mind blown. I did not know that part. So thank you for sharing that, and how powerful to know that that name, Hannah. Oh my gosh, it's gonna take me a minute to process that. Hannah's gonna join us again a little bit later in the program to close it out with your help in the audience as well. We have some audience participation coming up in what is known as a libation ceremony to remember those who sacrificed and came before us, names we know, and of course to remember the unknown as well. Next, we want to talk about how part of the Unknown Project lives at the Frazier and our Commonwealth exhibit on the second floor. It is another art installation. It is a space to reflect on the lives of enslaved Kentuckians. The space is inside, as you can see here, the recreation of a cabin where enslaved people resided. That cabin is right next to the columns and face of the Town Clock Church. And what's in that cabin was inspired by items that belonged to those who were enslaved. Glass artist Ché Rhodes created the installation, and we're thrilled that he joins us tonight to talk about his inspiration for this space right here. Please welcome Ché Rhodes.
Thank you all for having me. Rachel, you were at the top of my list of people to thank, but I think I'm going to revoke that after making me follow such a powerful slate of presenters. So I hope I can keep up. But no, I'm really thrilled to be able to contribute tonight, but I've actually also had a wonderful time absorbing all of the stories and the information that all of you have presented tonight. It's been extremely enlightening and moving for me. So thank you. Thank you all. I have to also thank Amanda Breedy, who was a former student of mine, who invited me to do this project, and then, of course, Hannah Drake and Josh Miller from the Unknown Project for allowing me to participate in their very, very powerful undertaking here. So my contribution for the Unknown Project is here at the Frazier, and it was this particular installation of glass objects. For me, the main approach was, I've looked into my history with, my ancestors' history of enslavement, and thought a lot about experiences I had as a young person and as an adult with the history of enslaved people in this region and beyond. And, thinking about it so often, and especially in my experience, what really left an impression was kind of the fear and the brutality of the history of enslavement in America. And, I wanted to, in sort of the spirit of the Unknown Project, keep in line with the humanity of those people that were enslaved. So that was the original goal and the original approach. So, rather than draw from imagery that might be a little bit more common or repetitious in terms of speaking about enslavement, I wanted to engage with objects that were more personal. So for me, I think the most direct way of engaging with someone who came before you is either being in a space that they inhabited or experienced. So for me personally, I've had the opportunity to be inside of a handful of slave dwellings and sharecropper homes, and just thinking about what people did in those spaces every day, and usually seeing not really the modesty of the space, but really the austerity of the spaces. I can remember being in a cabin the same size as the one upstairs, 2 stories, and just experiencing that space, and then finding out that 9 people in a family lived in that very small space for years and years and decades. So that was where the idea for the space came from. And then in terms of this other sort of way of communing with the past was to think about finding or acquiring intimate objects that might have been associated with enslaved people, and then how can we convey that experience to the audience. And I think I was just more naive than I sort of realized. And I thought we would, have this sort of wealth of archaeological treasures from which to, delve and kind of explore and choose what we would make. And there really isn't that much in the record. And it made me think a lot about how could this many people who we don't know their names largely, we don't know their histories, we don't know their personal stories, but how could this entire community, this entire population, this entire demographic have existed for this long in this country, made such strong economic and cultural contributions, and then so little is left over. So the objects that I found that we could work with were a spoon and a cowbell. And the spoon is obviously an implement with which I thought they were interesting objects because the cowbell is one of those objects that kind of speaks to the brutality and to the sort of fear associated with slavery. And the spoon is, a little bit more of a personal object, right? It's something that you use to convey sustenance into your body. But also in African American culture, oftentimes a spoon is an important object. If you go into people's homes, you'll see there are sometimes collections of spoons that have family histories. So I thought that was a nice, intimate, personal object. So we started with that. And the idea was it's kind of a collaboration with the Frazier. They constructed the space, the cabin. And then I digitally scanned these objects. And we couldn't use, obviously, the original objects. So in the case of the spoon, I digitally scanned it and then enlarged it, and then created a mold. And I just have to say, I asked Rachel to include these 2 sort of process shots, because one of the things that's been touched on tonight is the fact that so many enslaved people were actually skilled and knowledgeable workers, right? There were so many people. Tonight we're thinking about musicians, but also potters, brick masons, boat builders, not probably glass blowers, although there may have been some in Jamestown, but certainly weavers, cooks. We contributed a lot in terms of that history. And this idea of making objects in a mold kind of goes to the commodification not only of those processes, but also of those people, right? So you think of things that are kind of produced en masse. We usually think of objects as a commodity that way. In this case, it's actually people as well. So that was sort of the impetus for this. And then we use those molds to recreate those objects. The use of glass is important for me because not only of that sort of connection to skilled labor, but also because of the fact that glass being transparent, clear and transparent, is both present and absent at the same time. So we all know about the history of all of this stuff, but most of us have kind of a vague and general affiliation or association or understanding of what the lives of enslaved people were probably like and what their contributions might have been. I feel very privileged to be able to sit here and create an installation like this and actually be recognized for my work, my effort, my labor, to be fortunate enough just to be educated in the first place, to learn a trade and to have an advanced degree, and then to be able to share the stories of whoever it might be, myself or other people in this regard. So again, thank you very much for allowing me to contribute tonight, and I really appreciate all of your contributions and what they've done for me. So hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
If you didn't get a chance to see this before the program tonight, please come back and look at it. It is a wonderful space, and I wanted to make sure that we pointed out again, Amanda Breedy is the curator here at the Frazier. You were her mentor when you taught her at the University of Louisville, and Amanda reached out to Ché to create that in that space, and we're so privileged that you did that, so we thank you for that. We're going to bring back James Racine and Omega Latham for another story and song. And I'm paying close attention to the lead-in on this one, James.
One more time to all the presenters tonight and artists. This next tune I want to play, the title is Free. And when we try to contextualize that word in this setting, it's difficult, right? Because what does it mean to be free? Sometimes physically, we do look like we are free, but are we really free? And so as I play this, I invite you to close your eyes and think about what that really means, what it meant then, and what it means today, and the struggles that we face, and the struggles that we continue to face, and what freedom should really look like, and what freedom should really feel like.
Just beautiful. James and Trey. Again, thanks to everybody who participated tonight. It has been the best panel of presenters. I can't thank them enough for saying yes and helping us tell this important history. There are others who have been critical in telling that history, and author Pam Peters is here tonight. We wanted to acknowledge her, who's written extensively about the Underground Railroad. Jerry Finn, who helps tell the history of the Town Clock Church. He's with the group Friends of the Town Clock Church. And of course, Pastor Marshall and his lovely wife at the Town Clock Church. We just wanted to acknowledge them and thank them for all that they did. We'd all like you to help share this history by taking part in what is known as a libation ceremony. That is going to conclude our program. We wanted to end on this wonderful picture of a rainbow as we leave you. We thank you for coming, and a big shout out to all of the presenters tonight. If we could just give a round of applause. Hannah Drake is going to come back up to the podium to explain what we're going to do and how you all are going to be involved. We'd like each of our panelists to join us up here as well, if we could. They're going to be sharing names as part of this ceremony. So Jermaine, Jabani, James, Heather, and Brian, and Ché, if you all could come forward. And Hannah, I'm getting out of the way and turning it over to you. I've got the water. I'm going to move the plant out in the middle. So you explain this to everybody.
So we'll be doing a libation ceremony to remember some of the names of enslaved people that we do have. Each of us have 3 names. And I will start. I will read the 3, and then we will all say together after the 3 names are read, each of us read 3 names, we remember. And this is a libation ceremony, of course, to honor our ancestors, to honor the unknown, to certainly honor the 80,000 people that were enslaved and sold down the river, and the 250,000 people that Kentucky, in fact, did enslave here. So we remember them, and I will close out with the unknown, because there are names that we simply will never know, but we still honor them. So, unknown female, age 11, Cupid and Eliza, we remember. 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 And finally, to the unknown, we remember. Thank you.